Ethan Ward, the CEO, circled and tapped the $60,000 figure and chuckled as if it were proof of his intelligence. That's how the meeting began, and my work was finished less than 10 minutes later. "This is what efficiency looks like," Ethan Ward said, his voice sharp with confidence. "We're modernizing, streamlining, removing redundancy." Then he looked directly at me and added, without hesitation, "Your role doesn't justify its cost anymore. My name is Brian Cole, Senior Operations and Compliance Lead." I didn't interrupt him. I didn't argue. I didn't explain what my job actually covered. I had learned long ago that people who talk about efficiency rarely listen to explanations. Ethan leaned back, arms crossed. "Anyone can do what you do," he said. "We're not paying $60,000 a year for someone to babysit processes." The word babysit landed exactly as he intended. HR shifted uncomfortably. I felt the irritation rise, then settle. Shock has a way of numbing you before anger finds its footing. I asked a single question, keeping my voice steady. "What's the effective date of termination?" Ethan paused, clearly annoyed that I hadn't taken the bait. "Immediately," he replied. "No reason to drag this out." Mark Hensley, Director of Human Resources, slid the paperwork toward me. "Standard procedure," he said quietly. "Nothing personal." I signed without hesitation. Ethan smirked. "Congratulations," he said. "You just became our easiest savings this year." I stood, nodded once, and walked out. What no one in that room noticed, what no one bothered to read, was a designation buried in the termination packet. A role they didn't understand. A responsibility they never asked about. The final active compliance authority. They had just saved $60,000. And in doing so, they removed the one signature that legally kept their entire system alive. Take a second with me. How are you feeling right now? Stories like this can sit heavy. So if you can, step over to a window and let some natural light in for a minute. It's a small reset that actually helps more than people think. I'm curious, where are you listening from today? If this story already feels familiar. Stay with me and consider subscribing. What comes next is where the real cost of that $60,000 finally shows up. What stayed with me after the termination wasn't Ethan Ward's voice or the number on the screen. It was the quiet realization that most of my career had been spent proving my value by making sure nothing ever happened. That kind of work leaves no trophies behind. For years, there were no large bonuses attached to my name, no impressive titles that impressed visitors. My job descriptions stayed vague, almost forgettable. Yet every quarter, every audit cycle, every renewal period ended the same way: approved, cleared, allowed to continue. The company moved forward smoothly, and leadership mistook silence for simplicity. I learned early that the best problems are the ones that never surface. When a regulation changed, I adjusted workflows before anyone asked. When an external review loomed, I checked authorizations months in advance. When a minor discrepancy appeared, I corrected it quietly so it wouldn't grow teeth. That wasn't heroism. It was discipline. There were moments no one remembers now. A late-night call from an auditor who couldn't reconcile a process on paper. A regulator requesting clarification that could have frozen operations if answered poorly. A licensing renewal that arrived incomplete and would have expired during a holiday weekend. Each time, I stepped in early, fixed the issue, and handed leadership a clean outcome. No alarms, no meetings, no panic. Ethan never saw those moments. He arrived when the systems were already stable and assumed stability was permanent. To him, problems were visible events, failures, outages, penalties. If none appeared, then nothing needed guarding. He trusted speed over preparation and believed efficiency meant reacting quickly, not preventing quietly. The board shared that blindness. They saw charts, margins, and forecasts, but never the framework holding those numbers upright. No one asked why approvals were renewed without friction. No one questioned why inspections passed without escalation. They only noticed when something broke, not when it was prevented from breaking at all. By the time Ethan labeled my role redundant, the foundation had done its job so well that it appeared unnecessary. My absence, he believed, would be painless, replaceable, optional. The email arrived later that afternoon, forwarded to half the executive team. No need to backfill this position immediately. It read, "Current operations remain stable." I stared at the line longer than I should have. They weren't wrong yet. Everything still worked. The permissions were still valid. The systems were still allowed to run. But for the first time in years, no one was watching the quiet edges where problems begin. The first silence arrived quietly, which made it worse. After I left, nothing collapsed. Systems kept running. Dashboards stayed green. No alarms sounded. No warnings flashed. No urgent messages reached the executive floor. From the outside, it looked exactly the way Ethan Ward had promised it would look. I heard later how confident they sounded. See, someone said in a meeting I was no longer invited to, "We're fine without him." The absence of noise was taken as proof of success. Stability was mistaken for permanence, and no one questioned how long it had taken to build that calm. For a brief moment, even I wondered if I had overestimated my role. Years of habit don't disappear overnight, and the systems I designed were meant to coast before they ever stumbled. That delay was intentional. Silence, in the beginning, was part of the design. Then, the first hesitation appeared, subtle enough to ignore. A long-term partner paused a contract renewal, not with a complaint, but with a question. They needed confirmation that certain compliance conditions were still being actively supervised. It wasn't an accusation. It was curiosity wrapped in caution. The request landed on Laura Finch's desk. As Chief Financial Officer, she was used to numbers, not permissions. She asked her team to forward whatever documentation existed. What came back was fragmented policies without signatures, processes without a current name attached, nothing illegal yet, nothing actionable, just incomplete. Laura didn't panic. She frowned. She asked when the last review had been formally revalidated. The answers were vague. Someone suggested IT. Someone else suggested legal. Each department assumed another owned the responsibility. That assumption had always been wrong. But I had absorbed the gap quietly. Meanwhile, Ethan dismissed the concern. "It's procedural," he said. "They're being cautious. It'll resolve itself." Confidence filled the space where verification should have lived. Late that evening, an automated notice triggered without ceremony. No sirens, no emails marked urgent. One internal dashboard shifted status, changing a single word from active to pending review. The color barely changed. Most people never noticed. Laura did. She stared at the screen longer than necessary, sensing movement beneath the still surface. Pending review wasn't failure. It wasn't even a warning. It was a pause, a system acknowledging it could no longer confirm itself. I knew that status well. Pending review meant time, questions, and attention the company was no longer prepared to give. It meant meetings would start multiplying, and confidence would thin. Nothing was broken yet, but the system had stopped trusting the people in charge of it, and for the first time, no one was assigned to answer when it asked questions now. That was the first silence that mattered. The next part is only understood by the truly observant. Don't miss it. The tension escalated the moment they assumed something had failed. After the dashboard status changed, Ethan ordered IT to fix whatever Brian messed up. Engineers ran diagnostics, stress tests, and redundancy checks. Every report came back clean. No corrupted files, no system errors, no technical fault they could point to or patch. That answer only made Ethan angrier. If it wasn't broken, then someone had to be responsible. He demanded explanations, timelines, accountability. IT repeated the same conclusion in different words. The system was functioning exactly as designed. It was responding to conditions, not malfunctioning. So they hired outside consultants. expensive ones. The consultants reviewed documentation, interviewed department heads, and mapped workflows. They understood the architecture quickly, which only deepened the confusion. "There's nothing to repair," one of them finally said during a tense call. "You're not experiencing a failure," Ethan snapped back immediately. "Then why are we stuck?" The consultant hesitated before answering. "Because this isn't a technical issue, it's a legal one." That was the first time the word legal entered the conversation without being brushed aside. The system hadn't crashed, it had paused itself. Certain confirmations required a valid authority tied to its original approvals. Without that authority, the system couldn't certify its own compliance. In simple terms, nothing was broken, it was locked. Ethan rejected the explanation outright. He called it manipulation, a loophole, a trick. "This is a setup," he said. He planned this. The idea that a system could restrict him without malice offended his sense of control. But the consultants were clear. No one had sabotaged anything. The system was behaving responsibly. It refused to proceed without confirmation from someone legally recognized to provide it. Workarounds would only increase exposure. Laura listened carefully, her concern sharpening. She asked who could provide that confirmation. Silence followed. Names were suggested, then dismissed. Titles didn't matter. Authority did. That afternoon, the insurance notification arrived. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't urgent. It was precise. The message explained that coverage depended on ongoing oversight by the individual who had originally certified the operational framework. Any lapse required immediate clarification. "We need the person who signed off." It read, "No substitutes." Laura read the message twice. Ethan read it once and pushed back from the table. For the first time, no one argued. They had been looking for something to fix. What they actually needed was someone they had already removed. Panic doesn't arrive screaming. It creeps in disguised as denial. When Laura Finch finally connected the dots, the math stopped making sense. Without active insurance coverage, contracts could not be executed. Without contracts, revenue stalled, and without revenue, Ethan's celebrated savings meant nothing at all. Laura laid it out in a closed meeting. No insurance meant no binding agreements. No agreements meant no incoming cash. The room stayed quiet while Ethan waved it off. "This is temporary," he insisted. "We'll swap in someone else and move on." That order landed on HR within the hour. Find someone, anyone, a consultant, a former regulator, a senior manager with credentials. Mark Hensley started calling, emailing, escalating. The answers came back polite but firm. Certifications could not be transferred. Oversight chains could not be reassigned. The authority had to belong to the individual who originally held it. Ethan refused to accept that explanation. He accused HR of incompetence and consultants of exaggeration. He demanded alternatives. He asked legal to draft waivers, IT to bypass controls, finance to estimate the risk of ignoring the issue altogether. Each path led to the same conclusion. Permission could not be faked. Meanwhile, the calendar kept moving. Invoices sat unsigned. Renewals stalled. Sales teams were told to wait. Laura watched the numbers flatten, then dip. Every delay magnified exposure, and every meeting ended with the same unresolved question: who could legally sign? The answer was always the same, and no one said it out loud. I learned about the breaking point indirectly. A major client, one that had carried the company through lean years, paused its expansion plans. Their email was careful, professional, and devastating. They would not proceed until the company's compliance status was fully verified, no exceptions. Ethan called it overcaution. He said the client was bluffing. But Laura heard something else in the wording. Trust had shifted. The assumption of legitimacy was gone. What Ethan had framed as a simple cost-saving measure was now threatening the entire operating model. $60,000 had been removed, and with it, the right to keep moving forward uninterrupted. They were still telling themselves it was manageable, that it would resolve. that it was a misunderstanding. But the company had lost something it didn't know how to replace. It had lost permission. Denial kept them functional, but panic shaped their decisions. Meetings multiplied, voices sharpened, and blame began circulating without landing anywhere useful. Ethan still believed speed could outrun consequence. That confidence alone could substitute authority. Laura knew better, and that knowledge isolated her. The longer they waited, the more visible the absence became. Saving money had been easy. Understanding what they had lost was proving far more expensive, and no one was ready to admit the damage was only beginning now for them all. You will want to stay until the end to hear this part. The phone rang late in the afternoon, long after denial had turned into urgency. I recognized Ethan Ward's number immediately. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "We need to talk," he said, voice tight, controlled, already angry. I answered calmly. "I'm listening." That seemed to irritate him more than silence ever could. "This situation you created needs to be fixed," Ethan snapped. "Come back. We'll reinstate your position. Same salary, same title. Let's end this nonsense." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't remind him how easily he had dismissed me. "I'm not coming back as an employee," I said. "That option ended when you told me my work was replaceable." He laughed, sharp and humorless. "Don't play games." "Brian, you don't have leverage. I'm not playing," I replied. "I'm offering a solution." I paused deliberately. "Independent consulting, $5,000 an hour." The line went silent. Then Ethan exploded. "You're out of your mind," he shouted. "You expect us to pay you that after everything? You're not paying me to fix anything," I said. "You're paying me so the system is allowed to operate." He called it extortion. He accused me of sabotage. I let him finish. When he ran out of insults, I added, "This arrangement protects you, decline it, and nothing changes." The call ended abruptly. An hour later, my phone rang again. This time the voice was older, steadier. "Brian." "This is Richard Hale," he said, "chairman of the board." He didn't waste time. "Ethan briefed us," he said. "We need this resolved immediately." I looked out the window, unmoved. "Then he knows what to do," I replied. Richard exhaled. "He's resistant," he admitted. "Then he should hurry," I said. "Every hour costs him more." I ended the call and set my phone down. The balance had shifted, not because I demanded it, but because they finally understood who controlled permission. And for the first time, Ethan Ward was the one being told to solve the problem he created, immediately, or watch everything else freeze behind him while I waited, calm, patient, and expensive. He hated that calm. It stripped the argument of drama and left only consequence. He could threaten, shout, accuse, but none of it restored authority. Speed had failed him. Confidence had failed him. All that remained was process, governance, and time, none of which he respected. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. Power had simply moved back to where it belonged, quietly, contractually, without applause. The anger on his end confirmed it. He wasn't ready to accept that the conversation was no longer about saving money. It was about permission. And permission now had a price he never expected to pay so publicly, so fast, and entirely on my terms, whether he liked them or not at all today. Consulting began without ceremony. One signed agreement, one wire transfer, and suddenly I was back inside the system, this time as an external authority, not an employee. No desk, no badge, no meetings about culture, just a scope of work that listed exactly what I would and would not do. I didn't touch code. I didn't redesign workflows. I reviewed, signed, and supervised. The system didn't need repair. It needed permission. Each approval restored a narrow lane of legality, nothing more. Progress moved in increments, measured by hours, not outcomes. Every delay had a price, $5,000 an hour, billed precisely. I worked deliberately, documenting every review, every confirmation, every decision. Time became the meter of consequence. The longer they hesitated, the more expensive clarity became. Laura Finch watched the invoices climb. I could hear it in her voice during our brief updates. "This rate is unsustainable," she said once, carefully. "So was ignoring compliance," I replied. Ethan tried pressure next. He called repeatedly, demanding urgency. "We need this faster," he snapped. "You're dragging your feet. I'm working within scope," I answered. "You approved it." He accused me of milking the clock. I reminded him that haste created risk, and risk was the reason I was there. Silence followed, tight and resentful. The irony was satisfying in a quiet way. I had spent years preventing problems without recognition. Now prevention was visible, itemized, and expensive. Each signature I placed unlocked only what was necessary, nothing extra. Control stayed with me. Late one evening, Ethan pushed again. "Stay on tonight," he said. "We'll authorize overtime." "No," I replied. "I don't work outside agreed hours." "You're kidding," he said. "I'm disciplined," I corrected, "and available tomorrow." I ended the call and shut my laptop. The system could wait. Tension lingered on their side of the line, unresolved and costly. For the first time, speed belonged to me. They had wanted efficiency. What they bought instead was accountability, sold by the hour, capped by my rules, and entirely indifferent to their impatience. I knew the pressure would escalate. Contracts waited, partners watched, and every pause amplified scrutiny. Laura stopped arguing numbers and started asking timelines. Ethan stopped commanding and started negotiating. Neither liked the new math. I remained precise, polite, and unmoved. Authority had narrowed to signatures and time slots I controlled. When they realized urgency couldn't be bought in bulk, frustration replaced bravado. That realization was the real work. It didn't fix systems, it corrected assumptions, and as the hours accrued, the lesson became unavoidable. Removing quiet competence saves nothing. It simply converts certainty into invoices, paid slowly, painfully, and always too late. That truth settled heavily, and I let the clock run. Knowing restraint now would define every conversation tomorrow. They finally understood what patience actually costs. Resistance didn't arrive quietly. It announced itself through pressure, threats, and sudden legal interest. Once Ethan Ward realized patience would not bend me, he switched tactics. Calls turned colder, emails sharpened. The message was clear: comply faster, or face consequences he had not yet defined. He hinted at lawsuits first. "You're interfering with operations," he warned during one call. This could be construed as intentional obstruction. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I replied evenly. "Everything I'm doing is documented, contracted, and compliant." That only escalated his tone. Next came the search for loopholes. Ethan directed his team to comb through the consulting agreement, hoping to find a clause that forced my hand. Legal memos circulated. Questions multiplied. Each one circled the same hope that somewhere, somehow, my authority could be invalidated retroactively. When that failed, he hired outside counsel. The lawyers were aggressive, expensive, and thorough. They requested records, timelines, and correspondence. I provided everything promptly. There was no advantage in delay. Transparency was the strongest position I had. Every approval I issued, every limitation I enforced, followed established rules. The system wasn't being held hostage, it was being governed. After several tense days, their conclusion arrived quietly. No call, no apology, just a summary forwarded to senior leadership. I later saw a line from it repeated verbatim: "Mr. Cole is operating fully within his legal authority." That sentence shifted the room. Ethan didn't take it well. He accused the lawyers of being overly cautious. He suggested pushing forward regardless. Laura Finch pushed back, harder this time. Ignoring legal reality would expose them further. The standoff grew louder, more personal, authority fractured through it all. I remained distant. I attended only required sessions, spoke only when necessary, and refused to engage emotionally. Resistance loses momentum when it has nothing to push against. Then the request came from above Ethan. My phone rang early the next morning. The voice was familiar now. Brian. "This is Richard Hale," said the board chair. His tone carried urgency without hostility. "We need an emergency meeting. All parties. Today." I agreed without comment. That call mattered more than any threat Ethan had made. It meant escalation had reached its limit. The board no longer trusted internal narratives. They wanted clarity, and they wanted it fast. As I ended the call, I understood something Ethan still hadn't. Resistance only works when authority is uncertain. Mine had been confirmed. His was about to be questioned. The board meeting felt different from the start. No speeches, no posturing, no slides promising vision, just questions. Quiet ones, and a room finally ready to listen when it was my turn. I stood without notes and kept it simple. I told them I hadn't sabotaged anything. I hadn't shut systems down. I hadn't threatened anyone. I had done exactly what I had always done, ensured operations followed the law. The pause they were experiencing wasn't revenge. It was governance doing its job without shortcuts. I explained the structure plainly. Certain approvals required continuity. Certain permissions couldn't be transferred by title or urgency. When I was removed, that continuity ended. The system didn't fail. It refused to lie. No one interrupted. Then I showed the math. $60,000 saved annually by eliminating my role. Against that, consulting invoices already climbing into the hundreds of thousands, delayed contracts, frozen renewals, increased insurance scrutiny. The savings existed only on paper. The losses were real, compounding, and accelerating. That was when the room shifted. Laura Finch nodded slowly, already seeing the damage in her forecasts. Others avoided eye contact. Ethan spoke last, defensive and strained. He blamed complexity. He blamed timing. He blamed me. The board didn't engage. They had heard enough. The decision came without drama. Ethan Ward was relieved of his duties as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. An interim lead would be appointed. A full review would follow. The words landed heavy, but inevitable. I felt no triumph. Justice rarely arrives with satisfaction. It comes late, corrective, and indifferent to emotion. Before the meeting adjourned, I spoke once more. I told them my consulting engagement would end at close of business. The room reacted with surprise. Someone asked why. "Because my job here is finished," I said. "You understand the system now, and you know the cost of ignoring it." No one argued. Justice arrived late, as it often does. After damage makes denial impossible. Careers had been shaken, trust thinned, and momentum lost, all to protect a shortcut that never existed. No one apologized. They didn't need to. The consequences were already written into forecasts, contracts, and reputations. The board wasn't interested in punishment. They were interested in survival. That distinction mattered. Accountability wasn't emotional. It was corrective, deliberate, and finally aligned with reality. It forced hard decisions, removed illusions, and clarified responsibility without shouting, celebration, or unnecessary public spectacle afterward inside. I left the building without ceremony. Contract complete. Authority returned where it belonged. The collapse wasn't loud. It was procedural. A structure corrected after stress revealed its weakness. The board finally saw what had always been there, and once seen, it could no longer be denied. Leaving felt lighter than winning. I walked out quietly, without speeches or witnesses, carrying nothing except the certainty that the story was complete. No one stopped me. No one needed to. The building kept working behind me, just differently now, with awareness instead of assumption, in the weeks that followed. The company did what it should have done years earlier. They rebuilt governance instead of bypassing it. They documented authority instead of assuming it. They added redundancies that respected law rather than speed. Progress slowed, but stability returned. Permission, once invisible, became deliberate and expensive, exactly as it should have been. I declined every invitation to stay involved. Closure mattered. I chose my next project carefully, on my terms, with conditions written clearly and honored publicly. Scope defined, authority respected, hours limited. The work wasn't louder or more glamorous, but it was honest. Experience is valuable only when boundaries are recognized. What stayed with me wasn't anger, it was clarity. I had spent years being overlooked because nothing went wrong, when nothing breaks. People confuse prevention with absence. They praise confidence and punish caution until caution disappears and consequences finally speak. Justice, when it arrived, didn't raise its voice. It corrected imbalance. It removed illusion. It reminded everyone that systems do not exist to flatter leaders. They exist to protect continuity, trust, and legitimacy. If there is a lesson here, it's simple and uncomfortable. Not everyone will see your importance. Many won't notice your work at all. But value isn't measured by applause or titles. It's measured by what stops functioning when you're gone. Walking away taught me something else as well. Power doesn't always look loud or aggressive. Sometimes it looks like restraint, timing, and refusal to rush. I learned to trust process the same way I once protected it, letting outcomes mature without interference. The absence of urgency was its own answer. Where panic had driven decisions before, patience now shaped mine. I didn't need validation from the collapse itself. Knowing the rules had held was enough, and carrying that knowledge forward felt like freedom earned, not granted. It changed how I chose work, people, and boundaries, permanently redefining success on my own terms going forward, always. They believed they were buying efficiency. They believed authority was automatic. They were wrong. They didn't pay me to fix the system. They paid me so it was allowed to run. I learned that doing your job well doesn't always protect you, but knowing why your work matters will eventually protect you. What stayed with me most wasn't the money or the outcome. It was the moment I realized that integrity, patience, and boundaries can be more powerful than confrontation. I didn't need to raise my voice or prove anyone wrong. I only needed to let the system speak honestly, without interference. In the end, it always does. I'm curious, how did this story make you feel? Was there a moment that stood out or felt uncomfortably familiar? Have you ever been in a position where your value was invisible until it disappeared? And where are you listening from right now? If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. A like or a share helps these stories reach people who might need them. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing. There are more stories ahead about quiet strength, hard lessons, and justice that doesn't need to shout.